Okay, let's talk about a moment that pretty much the whole world saw, but very few people actually understood. It's about a single vote at the UN that, on the surface looked pretty simple. But once you start peeling back the layers, it reveals this massive, calculated shift in global power. So picture this. It's April 7th, 2026. We're at the UN Security Council, and there's a resolution on the table about the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this is one of the most critical energy choke points on the entire planet. This really should have been a straightforward vote. And almost instantly, the story was written. You saw headlines pop up everywhere, all painting a very familiar picture. China and Russia are just shielding their ally, Iran, protecting a regime that's causing instability and, risking the whole global economy. It's a simple, clean story. But hold on a second. There's a huge, glaring contradiction in that simple story. China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil in the world. A massive chunk of its energy flows right through that strait. So why on earth would the country with the most to lose from a blockade stop the one thing that's supposed to be the solution? Answering that question, well, it flips the entire chessboard. So let's do that. Let's deconstruct that official narrative. And it all kicks off with the details that pretty much everyone skimmed over, what was actually written in the resolution itself. Buried inside all that diplomatic jargon was this powerful little phrase, all necessary means. Now, in the world of diplomacy, that's not just some throwaway line. That is a green light. It is basically permission to start a war, all with the official stamp of international legitimacy. And look, this wasn't some one-off, knee-jerk reaction. The first draft of this thing was super aggressive. It got pushed back, so they softened the text, took out the really obvious language about offensive force, and still China and Russia said no. Then it was watered down even more, stripping out even more authority, and they still vetoed it. That tells you everything. Their problem wasn't with a specific word, it was with the entire idea. So that consistent no shows us that China wasn't just reacting here. It was playing a much deeper, four-layer strategic game. Let's break that strategy down. All right, let's start with layer one. This is the immediate geopolitical move on the board. Think about what this resolution really was. Even in its weakest, most watered-down form, it would have given the United States something incredibly valuable: legitimacy. It would have been the UN Security Council basically patting them on the back and saying, yep, you have our authority to use force in the Strait of Hormuz. And for Beijing, that was an absolute non-starter. There's this core idea in Chinese strategy called the Malacca dilemma. It's this deep-seated fear that the U.S. Navy could just squeeze its economy by controlling key shipping lanes, giving the U.S. UN-backed control over Hormuz. That just creates another one of those choke points. So blocking the resolution wasn't just an option. For them, it was a strategic necessity. Okay, so that's the military angle. Now let's talk about the money. Layer two. So let's ask a what-if question. What if the strait doesn't reopen quickly? Well, sure, on the surface, there's a lot of short-term economic pain. But underneath all that, it actually speeds up one of China's long-term goals, to weaken the US dollar's total dominance of the global oil trade. And to really get this, we got to talk about the petrodollar system. Ever since the 1970s, oil has been priced in dollars. That means every single country needs to get its hands on US dollars to buy energy. This creates this constant, built-in global demand for the currency, and it's a huge pillar of American financial power. A long disruption in Hormuz puts a lot of stress on that system, and it pushes more and more countries to look for alternatives. And guess who's been building those alternatives? Which brings us to layer three. And here's the obvious question you're probably asking. Wait a minute, isn't China just hurting itself with this whole move? And that is a totally fair question, but it assumes China is just reacting to this crisis as it happens. The reality is, this is more like a calculated stress test. China has been methodically getting ready for exactly this kind of scenario for years. I mean, just look at the prep work. They have massive strategic oil reserves stockpiled, they've diversified who they buy energy from, they've invested a ton in overland routes like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor to bypass the sea, and they're going all in on domestic energy. This isn't panic. This is them activating a plan they've had on the shelf for a long time. They built these buffers specifically to absorb this kind of pain. And now, let's get to the final layer. And honestly, this is the one that almost nobody talks about. The war for the story, the narrative. See, with this veto, China is doing way more than just a procedural block. It's sending a powerful signal to countries all across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, what we often call the Global South. It's positioning itself as the great defender of national sovereignty. And you could hear it in how China's ambassador explained the vote. He said the resolution completely ignored the root causes, the initial military strikes on Iran. Now, whether you agree with that or not is beside the point. That argument really lands with a lot of nations who are skeptical of Western military interventions. It frames China as the one upholding international law, not the one breaking it. So when you stack all four of those layers together, you see what's really going on. The veto wasn't designed to fix the crisis, it was designed to make it last longer. And this leads to the weaponization of a critical, non-military asset: time. In a long, grinding strategy like this, that's really the only question that matters. It's not about who's stronger in one specific moment. It's about who can take the pressure for longer. And when you look at it through that lens, the whole picture changes. On one side, you have the United States, and it's burning through incredibly expensive military hardware, for sure, but it's also burning through political capital and the public's patience. Every time the price at the pump goes up, every time the stock market dips, the pressure builds back home. On the other side, you have countries like Iran that have built their entire national identity around enduring pressure, and China, as we just saw, has been preparing for this. The veto just lets those costs keep piling up, mostly on the American side of the ledger. So, when you step all the way back, you realize this veto wasn't some defensive footnote in a bigger war. No, it was a decisive power play that completely reshaped the entire board. I mean, just look at the scoreboard. Militarily, China shaped the battlefield without firing a single shot. Economically, it put more pressure on the petrodollar system. Politically, it got to play the role of defending sovereignty. And in the story war, it told a narrative that a lot of the world wanted to hear. That's a win on 4 different dimensions, and it cost them almost nothing to do it. And that, right there, is the big takeaway. In this new era of global competition, a veto isn't just some boring procedural tool you use in a debate club. When you use it with this kind of precision, it's a strategic weapon. It can deny, it can delay, and it can completely reshape the outcome of a conflict before a single shot is even fired. So it leaves you with one final big question. Years from now, when historians look back, is it possible they won't see this quiet vote in New York as just some minor footnote? Could they see it as the moment the entire trajectory of this conflict, and maybe even the global order, actually changed?